Hopefully, you're experts in importing and exporting the six modules. So, why don't we talk about the class based components in React? Because so far we have been covering only the stateless functional components, which have been working out really well for us. We even finished the project for them. However, the class based components are going to be more powerful because we can do all the same things we were doing with stateless functional components. However, we can also have something called state as well as the life cycle methods. As you're watching this tutorial, though, React just released the React hooks, which also give the same functionality to a stateless functional components. However, that doesn't mean the classes are not being used or that the React hooks are replacing the classes. You can still use classes. Classes are very important. And quite frankly, there is too much code out there for us not to cover the classes. And again, the biggest difference would be that with class based components, we can do all the same things we were doing with stateless functional components. However, we can do two other things extra, which would be having a state as well as using the lifecycle methods. The classes in general in ES6 are the syntactical sugar. And the reason why we're talking about the classes because in order to create a class based components, we were going to have to use the classes. And in short, one sentence answer, the classes would be syntactical sugar for the constructor functions. And this allows us to basically have a simpler syntax. Because if any of you have been using the constructor functions, you know that it kind of gets annoying working with the prototypes and all that. So in ES6, we got a syntactical sugar. Where under the hood, everything still stays the same, but it's just the implementation is a little bit easier. If you need to catch up a little bit with classes, I would suggest pausing the video and just do a little bit of reading because I'm not going to go into any more detail since this is not a JavaScript tutorial or a course. This is everything that we have to do with React. So that would be my simplest answer that I can give you with the classes. However, in the React, this is even more interesting because not only we're going to be using the six classes, we're also going to have it as a subclass of a component class. Now, what that would mean is the fact that we are going to be extending from component class. And what that would mean in real life is we're going to be inheriting the functionality. And the component class is going to be used to transfer from the basic ES6 class to a proper component class. So why don't we go ahead and do that? First and foremost, we're going to have a different import, or we're going to have to work with React a little bit differently. Now, let me show you how this is going to work. So first of all, let me comment this out. Let's say that there's going to be no app, and the moment I'm going to save it, obviously my application is going to break. However, for the class, we need to use the class syntax, and the keyword would be class. And that is, by the way, the reason why we need to use in the JSX the class name. And this is exactly that because we have the keyword for the class. And then we would need to come up with a name. And again, I'm just going to call this app. And then this is the interesting part. In order to just to create a simple class, we can just do the curly braces. However, if we would want to inherit from the component class, then we would need to write extends. And then we have two options. Either you're going to see syntax like this, React component. So you can do it like this. So now you have a very powerful class-based component, or you're going to see the syntax like this, where we're just extending from component. However, in this case, this is important that you also fix your imports because in this case, yeah, you're working with React and everything was working fine. But if you're just extending from the component, make sure that you also specifically importing the component. And as a side note, notice what we're doing here. We already covered the imports and exports, right? So now we're doing the default export. We already know that this would be the default export from React, which the difference would be that in this case, we were doing some kind of imports from our own components or files or modules. But in this case, this would be the dependency. So we were already doing a bunch of importing and exporting. However, we just didn't notice that because we didn't cover it. And when I say exporting, we technically didn't do the exporting, but we for sure did a lot of importing since we already wrote many times React. Now, in this case, this would be the default one. And here we're looking for the name one. So now we specifically need the component. Awesome. So we have our powerful component. So what's next? Why don't we look at the method that you're going to use it a lot? I'm not going to say that maybe this is going to be the most important method, but that's going to be something that you're going to use a lot in your class-based components, and that would be the render method. Because the same way how we are working with functional components, the stateless ones, as we're rendering something, we also want to render something with our app. Otherwise, this is not going to make sense, or any class-based component for that matter. And how do we do this? Well, here we have a specific method. So the naming here is important. So don't follow my example where I always tell you, oh, this doesn't matter or that doesn't matter. In this case, it does matter. It does matter that we call this render. And then within the render method, we have our return. And then within the return, this is where we're returning everything. So let's say if we're returning the section and we're using not the implicit return that we had already here, we need to use the explicit return. And then let's say we're going to set up our parentheses and we're going to say whatever we would like in the parentheses. So first of all, maybe let me comment this out. I'm going to copy and paste it. Once this is copy and pasted, again, I'm going to comment it back out. So we're going to say something like this. And again, we have everything working. We have our app. And by the way, let me show you something very powerful again with exports and imports, where if I'm going to rename this and I'm going to say app1, and I'm going to say that I would like to export default app1. Even though we are exporting this is as a app1, our index does not change. So our application doesn't break. For the simple reason that we are doing the default export. And in this case, we can name this whatever we would like and just use that variable. And that would be just a side note. And yeah, we successfully created our first class-based component. We looked at the render method where we're going to have the return. So all our returns are going to happen here. And as a side note, all our functionality is basically going to happen here above this render, or some cases, we're also going to look at here above the return. This is really going to differ depending on the situation. But again, the rules would be exactly the same. If you're going to do something that is not allowed within the JSX, you're going to get an error. So that's not going to be any difference. However, now we're using the class-based component, which will going to give us those two powerful things, state, as well as using the lifecycle methods, which we wouldn't be able to do it with stateless functional components.